Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the TFTuesday Podcast. I'm joined today by a very special guest. Cameron, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Cameron. Online, I probably go by Curious. My Twitter is a Curious Fox, or you can find me on FA under Curious Red Fox. Because I don't know how to name myself on the internet, and I didn't think it'd stick around.
Yeah, naming's always a tricky time, isn't it?
Yeah, I will be the millionth guest to say I hope that they allow us to change it at some point.
Yeah, honestly, I understand why they haven't implemented it yet because it's literally just one person with like a team of people running the site and it's not like an actual company or anything. I don't know. I feel like the username thing is something they could have implemented by now.
Yeah, I feel like I got stuck with a mistake I made almost 15 years ago now, but that's okay.
Yeah, and it's just haunted you ever since.
Yeah.
So, just to kind of introduce people to yourself, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself in terms of your interest in transformation and what kind of got you started in the fandom?
Sure. So I'm mostly a hobbyist artist. I like to just do it on my own time. And in the non-digital world, I'm a wildlife veterinarian. So it's technically Dr. A Curious Fox. A lot of my time is spent working and making very heavy decisions a lot of the day. But it's fun and I enjoy it and I learned a lot. I guess I got into TF like most people who have kind of been on. I started in TF before I really knew it was a thing. So I think I got my start way back with the Magic School Bus. And I can remember very discrete scenes from it and parts of it that were just like, whoa, this is awesome. And it seemed like such a cool way to learn and experience and explore the world. Because one of the things I'm really into is learning and sciences. And I keep everything super fascinating when you really get down to it. So it started with the Magic School Bus. I was a huge nerd in school, very dorky, didn't know how to be cool, didn't want to be cool because I was just too busy being wrapped up in learning cool things and exploring ideas. And I remember being pretty young and we were going around the classroom doing a what do you want to be when you grew up? And I think I first said a chemist, which was at a time when nobody in my class knew what chemistry was. And then I said a geneticist. And I would say that TF probably played a role. Actually, I don't even know at this point whether I wanted to do those things because of TF or TF was just a really cool branch of those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like a chicken and the egg situation. You don't know which came first, but they ended up kind of complementing each other.
Yeah, a little bit. I guess this is also kind of where I started drawing. I took a big break from it, but I started really liking bats when I was a kid, and I was a huge Batman fan. But I would start by drawing all these different species of bats, and there are hundreds of species of bats. And then I remember showing them off to a teacher in grade school and missing my bus. And to show you how not cool I was, I cried because I missed the bus.
Oh.
So I was a little wimpy kid, but I was just excited to share my drawing. But then I probably ended up taking a big break from drawing and things. And I got into Animorphs when I was in 5th grade, really found it cool, started to have a bunch of TF dreams at that time, which was really cool. And then I reread them all in 8th grade, and I think that's where it really finally stuck, and I started to try to kind of branch out and look into TF. I was also a super late bloomer to the internet. I was using floppy disks into high school.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I didn't know what a USB was. I didn't know how the internet worked. There were people who said you can do tons of stuff and you can find all these things, and they would show me, and I'd be like, whoa, that's neat. And I would look at that one tiny corner of the internet and never understand that I could look at more, that other things were out there. So my true introduction to like the TF community as a whole came, I think I was in 7th or 8th grade. I really liked The Legend of Zelda, and Twilight Princess was coming out around that time. And I was just Googling like Legend of Zelda wolf transformation or something like that, because obviously that's the coolest part. You get to be a freaking wolf.
Yeah, that's the best part.
And I stumbled upon Arania's art gallery, because she had a Zelda into a wolf sketch from way back in the day. And then I think a little while after that, I found my way into some other branches. I started with DeviantArt, and then I eventually moved on to For Affinity and Twitter much later. mainly because I didn't really like furries, and I didn't know what it was about. And I was just like, okay, like I get you guys like animals, but this isn't what I'm here for. So eventually I kind of dabbled more in the furry side, and now I almost get situate myself plainly in the TF side. Like furry is okay, but TF is really where it's at for me.
Gotcha. So not really like fully a furry, but just like a very whole hog sort of TF fan.
Yeah, and like I think it comes out when I said, "Whoa, I haven't drawn my fursona in 5 years." So I had to fix that, so I did a TF of my Sona, but I don't really draw just straight furry or anthro art usually.
It definitely sounds like, and I know past guests have mentioned this too, like you're definitely more interested in the actual process of getting to a final thing, not actually like, just drawing anthro art.
Yeah, and like the final thing can be really cool, but I feel like the change is definitely the most interesting part because, like, I don't know, I think it's really interesting to watch how things change and to get from point A to point B. I guess I'll just kind of get into it. When I think about TF or like my main interest in TF, I know people call it a fetish, and a lot of people it seems to be that way, and that's totally fine. But for me, it's more for the novelty and the experiences, and it's try to experience and relate to different things, which you can't obviously do in real life. So I would say I'm a biologist and I'm a scientist at my core, and I think that it would be really cool and very interesting and eye-opening to try to experience beyond just like, oh, being a dog or something, which is great. But I don't know, being a squirrel and trying to figure out how to live as a squirrel, even though squirrels are literally the devil.
They're the devil.
Yeah, they're terrible, but they're great. They're fun. Or to explore environments that I can't get to, or have a better understanding of the environment right around me. Like we all walk through a park and pass trees, but to experience it from a robin's perspective, or a vulture, or even like a moss or a mushroom would be really interesting and different. And I feel like it would get you a much bigger understanding of the world. It mostly started and is still the primary for me to do kind of more of an ecology exploration or like a biology focused way. But the more I get into it, the more there's also the very not realistic or the much less scientific ways where to even try on like somebody else's personality for a time would be really interesting, because being able to see the world through somebody else's eyes could be really interesting. And it's like that old wives' tale. It's like, well, we all refer to the same thing as red or whatever, but what if the red I see is different than the red you see? Using a TF or a personality TF or something could do something much more complex than just your colors. It could be your whole outlook on life, or what kind of things stand out to you when you watch a scene or exist in your environment.
So you almost approach it a little bit more with that scientific lens in the sense of almost collecting data and getting to really understand what it means to like kind of move through the world from sampling different experiences, be it through other people or other species.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's like an endless well there. And like lots of people do say a dog TF is very common and popular. But if people would really get down into it and really explore it, and maybe this is just me not looking at the right kinds of things or reading the right kinds of stuff, but like even if myself and I have a twin brother, even if we went through the same TF into the same breed of dog, we would probably have very different experiences with it. So it's cool because even if you do the exact same setup and exact same plot, for lack of a better term, with different starting points, you would have very different experiences.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that because the classic example that I always think of from a science perspective is there were the two astronaut twins, the Kellys, who they went up, and I think one of them stayed on the ground and one went up to the International Space Station for a time. And then they actually used them to see what the effects of space were on the one who went up to the International Space Station. So it almost reminds me of that in the sense of like examining things through that very scientific hypothesis and testing lens.
I haven't heard that story. It's kind of cool. The ultimate twin study.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of really interesting studies I know that they do on twins and such. So, you've mentioned obviously that you're Dr. Cameron and, you have that background in veterinary science, which obviously has given you a really detailed understanding of animal anatomy. So, When it comes to like transformation content, how do you work to translate that knowledge into your own artwork? Because, obviously you've done a lot of drawn artwork in your downtime, and I've definitely seen that from the way in which you depict TF, there is a lot of attention paid towards the anatomy in shifts and changes.
Yeah, well, I feel like I studied all that anatomy for so long, I better use it. You know how many muscles are in your thigh alone? There's a ton. So, I mean, I spent months just memorizing the muscles and then blood vessels and nerves and everything, and that's just the anatomy. But usually what I do is I use a lot of references, and I try to look up references. I look up the natural histories of the animals that I'm TFing into, and I try to use that. And if I am reading about it and I learn something really cool, I'll try to make that a feature in a drawing I do. Other than that, it's mostly just kind of paying attention, because once you learn the anatomy and you really start to look for it, and it's your job to look for it, it's kind of hard to enjoy a drawing that's really off, I guess, at least for me, because I can see the issues. And like, man, elbows, I struggle with elbows so much because it's just hard to get them, and I'm getting better because I realize now that there's the certain points to it and the way the muscles curve along it and the angles that it can reach realistically. So it's just kind of keeping an eye for detail for me, and not to say that I can replicate anatomy very well, but I at least try to pay the attention to it. Partly because that's how it looks good to me, and partly because it can be a really cool way to be very subtle about your changes and make it a little more realistic. Like, I did a series of drawings or a little sequence a while ago of me turning into like a were Great Pyrenees, which is a breed of dog. And one of my favorite things about that is, instead of having like my big toe fade away into nothing, it doubles, and I have double dew claws because that's just a feature of that breed. And just super cool and weird. And now I'm a polydactyl, I guess, because of that. But it's just kind of cool. And in anatomy, there's a saying, or in medicine, form follows function. There's a very specific reason, generally speaking, why bodies are built the way they are. They serve some sort of function at the same time that they reduce the energy expenditure necessary for it. So if I'm drawing a horse TF and I totally miss out on certain ligaments in there, then it's not going to work at all as a drawing, and it's not going to resemble a horse at all. And I feel like it's doing a disservice to the species that you're trying to represent. Plus, like, if you're going to TF, why wouldn't you want to be the whole way? Every muscle that's there, every ligament, tendon, whatever, by the end of a TF, I don't want to be 0.1% human and 99.9% horse physically. I don't want my human tendons remaining.
Yeah, you want them to fully have transitioned over.
Yeah.
So basically, when you see artwork that doesn't really adhere to the proper anatomy, it sounds like it definitely rings kind of alarm bells in your mind.
Kind of. A lot of it is given to style, and I'm definitely loosening up. I used to be very focused on more realistic style, but now having stylized and non-natural, or like, I don't want to say non-natural colors because that kind of brings up a whole different thing, but having more expressive colors. Like, if you look at, I don't know, just having colors that pop. So if you draw your fox with that's super orange, but it's still a realistic orange and you can see it as kind of a stylized way, that's great. But if you draw your horse with cloven hooves or your cow with a single hoof, I'm going to be pretty annoyed. And I'm not going to find it interesting, or it's going to kind of detract from the enjoyment I get out of it.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it especially goes for bats because I'm super particular. Like, you can draw what you want, you can do whatever you want. I'm not here to yuck your yum, but your bats have to at least have wings, because I've seen some wingless bats, and I don't really like the wings on your back. And also for birds, go for it, have fun, have full feathered hands, do it. I don't know where you're getting talons for hands from.
Yeah, I mean, I will say bat anatomy is definitely a bit intimidating, at least to me. I know I've considered doing like photo manips of bats and then just been like, no, I'm not going to do this justice, because their arms are so complicated, and it's a little intimidating to try and translate into artwork, because it's like, if it looks kind of off, especially with bats, it really looks off.
Yeah, it does.
So then I guess, when it comes to anthropomorphic characters, I mean, obviously that isn't something that's fully grounded in reality. How different do you think their anatomies would be between humans and their animal counterparts? Like, is there a right way that a hybrid or anthropomorphic character should look?
I would say it's all up to the individual. You can obviously do whatever you want with your creations, but if you wanted to try to stick towards more realistic ways to do it and still wanted to be not just a human with fur or something, then I would say you can have a lot more fun paying attention and trying to figure out how to make things work. And I went to a talk at a con a few years ago, and I think a guy named Dr. Gulo or Dr. Wolverine or something gave a talk on how anthro characters would work. And it's really cool. And he also mentioned somebody, I can't remember their name, who he worked with to try to make almost like anatomy atlas for different species anthros. And it was really cool. But it's basically just how much do you want to get into it? Because if you're a horse person or an anthro horse, then you're probably not going to want to eat meat. And you're probably going to want to eat some of the things horses eat, which humans can sometimes eat, but not always. And you probably want to do it justice. So you're going to have a well-developed cecum, which is a big, heavy digestive chamber kind of near the end of your small intestine that's full of gas. It's going to be very noisy. I don't know how you're actually going to fit it in your body, so you'll probably have to be big or it's going to be small. You'll be eating a lot of small meals throughout the day versus if you wanted to be an anthro cow, you're going to eat all day but huge amounts and have a giant rumen, and I don't know where you're going to put it because in a regular cow, I could crawl inside a rumen.
Wow. Oh my
I
gosh.
almost got you.
Oh, you did?
Well, I reached up to my shoulder into one.
Oh my
Yeah, it's
gosh.
fun.
Oh man. So yeah, I guess like in that sense, either you would have to proportionally size it down and that might like negate the effect of the organ itself, or you would just have to be that much bigger.
Yeah. And that's a pretty like straightforward example, but like one thing that makes horses really unique is they have this really cool apparatus in their legs that allows them to stand without expending energy. It's this really cool interconnected system of the way their tendons and ligaments are set up and the way their bones are curved. So, but part of that means that if a horse lifts its leg and bends its knee, then it has to bend at the ankle as well. So I've seen drawings where people will like bend the knee but stretch out the ankle and the foot, and it just immediately looks off to me. And there's going to be a give and take. So if you're an anthro horse, you're going to have a hard time doing yoga in some way.
Because you won't be able to do that kind of bending.
Yeah, and like climbing would probably be a little difficult, regardless of whether you have hooves or not. It's mainly at the root of it, it adds some really interesting problems to overcome and things to think about.
And that's not even touching on, the whole do you have hands or do you have hooves in both the hands and feet for a number of different species.
And it doesn't touch on a lot of the like internal anatomy necessarily, or like the small anatomy. Like birds have really high blood pressures, or at least some of them do, or like a giraffe can have really high blood pressure. And so does your anthro giraffe have really high blood pressure? They're probably going to if you want blood to reach their brain, and they have to have all these really weird, cool adaptations to try to bend down or lie down in a bed at night if they can find a room that can have, a bed big enough for them.
Yeah, I imagine, if those things were to happen in real life, you'd have this entire other field of medicine where you would need to actually like adapt to each individual species or like have that kind of extrapolation from veterinarian medicine into this kind of anthropomorphic practice almost of dealing with things like, as you said, high blood pressure potentially, and how do you navigate that as a horse? Like, do you need to start looking out for your cholesterol more, stuff like that? Like, I think you'd have to kind of grapple with all of those questions.
That'd be really interesting. I would definitely trust my veterinarian more than my doctor if that was the case.
I think most people would too, honestly. And, obviously TF also throws a bit of a wrench into that in the sense of like if you had a long drawn out TF and you're going from say human to using giraffe as the example, an anthro giraffe, how would you actually monitor the person's vitals as they're going through it, and what level or type of care would they need in order to make that kind of transit successful. I think that would be something that would also be a pretty big open-ended question.
Yeah, you could get a lot of publications out of that.
Oh yeah. I feel like someone would definitely win the Nobel Prize for like helping someone go through that the first time.
Oh my God, yeah. That'd be amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of science and medicine and TF, as someone with a very intimate knowledge of biology and physiology, I feel like you're pretty well positioned to opine on the topic of TF and whether it could actually be actualized through science. So I guess my question for you is, what are the odds of it happening in our lifetime? Is it just around the corner? Do you think it's impossible? Are you going to crush some dreams here on the podcast? What do you think?
I think, unfortunately, I am going to crush some dreams, but I also want to offer an alternative.
Okay.
So just for fun, I like to think about this, and I wrote up a 10-step process to scientific TF, why you should invest in finding a witch. So going through this, I hope you're going to learn something because it's kind of interesting, but I'm going to make
I'm sure I will. I'm sure we will.
I'm going to make a couple assumptions. I'm going to assume that, one, you want to survive by the time this is through, that you don't want to suffer for the rest of your life, medically speaking. And I'm going to assume that after we name a step, let's say that science as a community focuses exclusively on that step and then perfects it before moving on to the next step. That way we don't have to worry about, well, what if step 1 we got it wrong and step 5 comes down the line? We're just going to say we spent all of our time and effort on one step, perfected it, and moved on, which is a big thing to ask because you're going to see that this is not something that you can just perfect and move on. So going about this scientifically, I'm going to assume, or at least my basis is in doing it biologically through genetics. Having done surgery, I don't think surgery is a route you want to go, and I don't think it's going to get you what you want. Also, it'll be very painful and probably not very nice. So step 1, you want to find the genes that you want. Let's do red panda. Let's pretend we're going to do red panda through this.
Yeah, I'm very down with that.
Yeah, everybody loves red pandas. Objectively the cutest animal. So you're going to want genes for the hair coat, the pattern of the hair coat, ear fluff, muzzle, the ears, anything that was used developmentally to make the anatomy, paw pads, tail, basically your framework for your body, which finding those genes would probably be the easiest step in this process, or at least the one that we have the most grasp on now. We do a lot of research now, and we have some pretty decent methods for trying to identify which genes do what by tracing back different kinds of metabolites and by marking and combining these genes into other things and kind of tracking them and just kind of keeping them in our view and understood. So it's very time consuming. It will take a lot of searching, but this one we could theoretically figure out a way to. I should say that just starting out, a human has about 25,000 active genes, but that also doesn't incorporate how they are processed differently. So a gene is a segment of DNA that is used to make a protein. But when you take the DNA and you go to the protein making phase, you can take segments of that DNA and the segments of the protein that corresponds, and you can switch them around, move them around, and you can make multiple different proteins from the same segment of gene. So just finding the gene isn't necessarily going to be enough. You'll have to understand how those genes are processed as well, because ultimately it's the proteins that are the goal. DNA is great. It doesn't do anything other than record. Protein is what does the work and therefore gives you your tail and your fur and your boopable nose. So second step is you have to find a way to get these new genes that you've searched for into the recipient organism. There's a couple ways that we know how to do this now. You could use a virus theoretically, or there's gene therapy. There's work on nanomachines, which seem pretty interesting. Or you could use some futuristic CRISPR-Cas9 system, which is I've seen make the circles in the TF community.
Oh yeah, CRISPR has definitely come up a number of times.
Yeah, and I like it as a plot mechanism, but that's not exactly how it works. And there are issues with this because there are side effects to everything. So like, if you use a virus, you have to target what cells you're going to infect. A flu virus doesn't infect your liver, and it doesn't infect your skin. So it's not going to be able to deliver the genes to where you want. So I don't know, you probably don't want fur growing in your lungs or in your respiratory tract anywhere.
I don't think so, no.
And we are designed with our immune system to fight off viruses. So if you were to figure out a virus that would work and infect the cells you want to, and you wanted to give it a big enough dose that you could actually infect all of your skin cells, you're going to cause a really bad immune reaction. You're going to get sick and maybe die from it. So it's an issue in the way. You could try to do multiple doses, but you'll start to build up an immune response that'll kill it before it gets the chance to do anything. And you have to figure out how to get the genes in the right spot. There are a lot of viruses actually that can give you cancer because they basically just go in there and they interrupt and insert their genes into places that either don't code for anything and they start to code for something, or they can interfere with a certain kind of gene that helps fight tumors and cancer, so they can kind of get rid of your natural immunity system to cancers. So you have to get the genes in, but you have to get them in the right place too. You also have to then get those genes to express appropriately. So if I get them in the cell and into the DNA strand, there's a whole bunch of factors that regulate exactly how, when, and under what conditions different genes are expressed. Because once I'm a developed individual, I don't want the gene telling me to grow fingers to continue. I want it to stop, and I want it to never become active again, generally speaking. So there's the potential that through this process, you would end up turning on all these random genes that are used in development. You could potentially turn on different kinds of virus genes that we all have encoded in us. You could turn on a bunch of random genes and ultimately kill yourself or get cancer.
Okay, cool. So very fun potential outcomes if this goes wrong.
Yeah. A lot of this is you'll either die or get cancer.
Got it. Perfect.
And you don't want to go too fast or too slow because you'll cause too big of a reaction or you'll use up all your energy and die. Also, you might want to have seasonal changes. If you're an Arctic fox, you probably think it would be cool to have a summer and a winter coat. So you have to figure out how to have those kinds of seasonal changes take place. We're on number 4. This one is no cancer. You don't want
the no cancer step.
Yeah, the no cancer step, since all this has kind of been leading up to that. You want to not be dysregulated in all your gene expression. You need them integrated correctly, and you can't have them mutate too much on their own as your cells take them up, and the viruses mutate as they would try to deliver them, if that's the route you're going to go. You can always go for a little mutation. If you have a little extra, you might start losing the function of the gene. And then you'll just get into the cancer line.
Right.
We all know there's a bunch of possible medications and things that try to prevent cancers and treat cancers, so maybe you could combine with those if you do end up making a mistake. But if you wanted to go about it as safe as possible, you would try to find out how to regulate and put them in the right places first and not rely on chemotherapeutics or radiation.
Yeah, that makes sense. I definitely don't think that you'd want to be going through this process and then have to stop almost at certain points just to go through chemo.
Yeah, it would really slow things down. And we're fine with slow TF, but I don't know if you want to stretch it through that.
Yeah, that would not be a fun side effect.
No. Then you have to try to get your immune system to recognize that the things you just put in are going to be not destroyed immediately. Because the immune system tends to see things that it hasn't been exposed to before as foreign, especially if you give it as a virus. So I took a semester of immunology as part of it, and it's way too in-depth for what I really need in my day-to-day, but it's super interesting because it tells you about all these different ways that your body will automatically and naturally grab different proteins and present them to your immune system and say, this is okay, this is not okay. If you see this ever again, destroy it as fast as possible and swarm the area and start killing the rest of your cells in that area just to make sure you get rid of this. And that's basically why there's so many viruses that give you a cough. You have so much inflammation in that area as the body's trying to fight it that it starts to have all this collateral damage.
So basically your body learns the different DEFCON levels almost.
Yeah, basically. It's really cool. If you're really interested in this stuff, look up things like toll gate receptors. There's a bunch of different kinds of those, and this one specifically reacts to a certain protein found in bacterial cell walls. This one responds particularly to certain aspects of viral DNA. And they cause different types of effects and stimulate different immune cells to go try to fight it or deal with it and prep yourself just in case you encounter it again. It's super cool.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So you can always try to figure out the right avenue to desensitize you. There's some interesting research in how come you're not allergic to all the bacteria in your gut. And there's an idea that because of where it is, there's a term for it, an immunologically privileged area, I think is what it is. That your gut's teeming with more bacteria than what make up the rest of your body, but you don't mount this huge inflammatory response against them, generally speaking. And so maybe we could figure out the avenues that your body does that and introduce these new genes and proteins in that way.
So basically almost find like take that as an example of what the homeostasis for the rest of your body could be and try to apply it to that.
Yeah, basically hijack the mechanisms your body already has and use them for our own selfish gains. Or you could just be on lifelong immunosuppressants, but that's also not great because you'll get sick everywhere and you could probably die.
Yeah, that would not be fun.
So those are the first 5 steps. That's just to figure out what to do.
Yeah, that's just the first 5. I'm like keeping track of all these steps and I'm going, oh my gosh, we're only halfway.
Yeah, these ones will go a little bit faster because so far we've mostly understood everything, and we have some foundational idea, but it's about to get a little bit more abstract and a little less familiar. So now that we've got everything in, we need our tissues to change, because just because the genes are there doesn't mean you will change. It could just be that, hey, my cells started to express a random protein. It's not actually showing me the changes I want. And it can be hard because it's very dependent on what kind of tissue you have. So bones generally stop growing once you reach a certain age. Nerves don't really regrow, but we're looking at more ways to make those happen. Your eyes are generally the same size and shape your entire life. They don't really change. There's not much cell division or anything going on in your retina, so it probably won't get you that cool reflective tapetum that some animals have. Cartilages are pretty inert. You'll have to regrow new teeth and nails and hair. So there's a lot of different tissues, and those are just like the features, not necessarily the internal kinds of things that you'd have to do. Like if you want to go a cow, you're gonna have to split your stomach into 3 extra parts, and they'll all have to take on different weird stuff. There's a lot that goes into it, and just because the genes are there doesn't mean the tissues are going to change. Then number 7, you'll have to control the rate of the TF, because if you try to do a very fast transformation in just a couple of minutes, all these genes being expressed and all that protein making takes a lot of energy and a lot of resources. So if you go fast, you're just going to deplete yourself and you'll die. There are conditions in some animals that are metabolic diseases, and then there are, I don't know if I want to call it a lifestyle disease, but like if you really push yourself running, or if you're a horse and you work on a farm and you're overworked, you could end up actually running out of ATP, or the molecule that your body uses as energy. You can run out of that, and then you're basically just laid up if you survive for a long time. It takes days to weeks to replenish it.
So basically, poof, TF is right out.
Yeah, no, there'd be no way. And different tissues do different things. So your gut lining is constantly dividing, constantly making new cells. It'll flip over very quickly. Your skin will also probably do it pretty quickly too, but your muscles won't. If you turn into something bigger, you'll probably end up having this very loose, flabby skin hanging off your tiny frame, and that would probably look really awkward.
Yeah.
And you also don't want to cause widespread inflammation for kind of the same reason that a giant viral dose would do. You'll just feel awful. Number 8 is you're going to have to try to repurpose the functions that you already have. So your brain is going to need to do a lot of remodeling and a lot of reconnecting in its pathways. Because if you want to be able to wag your tail, we don't really have the nerve structure dedicated to a tail. And I kind of wanted to get into this because it's really cool. Mm-hmm. Different animals have these special fibers, or these specific fibers in their brain that helps deal with kind of the function, or like high function areas, or areas that your brain pays very high attention to. So if you remember the homunculus, it's the human with a tiny body but giant lips, giant hands, and there's a few other big parts, but it's a really weird proportioned human. It shows you what the brain is kind of dedicated towards and what parts of the body it pays the most attention to. And so for humans, it gives our eyes, our lips, and our hands a ton of attention because that's kind of how we explore the world, and we're very vocal. It's very important for us. But a lot of other animals, they also have, I don't want to say the homunculus because that means little human, but they have that kind of thing, and you can track those kinds of nerve fibers. And so it's really kind of neat because if you look at a dog, it's like they don't have as many big areas as humans do because they don't have any specific, very purposeful body parts, I would say. Like they give fairly equal attention relatively to all of their body. And so one spot doesn't tend to shine as much. But if you look at horses have huge bundles focused on their lips because they do a lot of different kinds of motions, a lot of different kinds of eating, and eating as a horse is a lot of lip smacking and a lot of prehension with their lips. So they have big sections for that, but they have very small for their hooves because literally their hooves are basically just there for running. They don't really have dexterity. So it's just kind of cool, but it's something that you'd have to deal with depending on what kind of animal you were going to be.
Yeah, basically everything would have to almost resize and rewire in your brain to at least somewhat match those kind of resized focus areas within your brain.
And that's just your brain. There's a lot of other functions that your body would have to do. Like cats, you would end up, if you would turn into a cat, you would end up losing certain kinds of enzymes in your liver, and so certain toxins would hit you harder, which is great, I think. But just things you'd have to pay attention to when you go into this. You'd probably be like, well, maybe I don't want to lose my ability to detoxify certain plants or things that I come in contact with, or different kinds of drugs, so that people can actually dose me accurately. But all just considerations that you'd have to know going in. Number 9, you'd have to preserve your personality, which we don't really know how personality works. We have ideas of where in the brain parts of it are related and where parts of your memories are kept and things like that, but we don't really know how it's coded, how it's kept there, and how to remodify your brain but keep those. So I don't have much more to say on that because we don't know.
That one's a very philosophical section. I know that, there's a lot of thought around what is it that makes a person, and, outside of just the biological context, there's lots of philosophy around these are the things that make you a person. Is it just your memories? Is it your experiences? How much of it is genetic? How much is it, social interactions? I feel like that almost isn't a step that would ever be perfected prior to this happening. Like, I don't know how you would really means test that kind of a thing.
Yeah. There's a reason philosophy exists and asks all these kinds of questions, and there's the reason it's still being asked for thousands of years.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going to solve it in one podcast.
Yeah.
So
And that's just the concept of that. But these questions have been around for thousands of years, and those questions don't have an answer. And that's not even to say how would we do it if we did know. So we're already thousands of years behind.
Yeah. So that step is definitely in the fuck around and find out category.
Yeah. And then I kind of have step 10, which is miscellaneous. It's kind of the beyond your body. So it includes other things like what your microbiome is doing, or the bacteria that live in and on you, how your epigenetics might play a role. So you can have factors from outside you influence your coding and expression. And if you don't know what epigenetics are, it's kind of a little bit newer. They started to find it because if your grandfather smoked, on your father's side or on your mother's side, then it would have impacts on how your body would develop. And it's this crazy, much more complex way of how different things way outside your control start to influence you. And then, how are you going to protect yourself from new diseases? Because you probably, if you just TF, you probably are, if you're an anthro, you're probably a lot more susceptible and also immune to a bunch of different diseases that people have never seen in either species of what you are.
Yeah, so almost, you don't have, for example, if you're turning into a red panda, you don't have the antibodies that maybe a normal red panda would have because they've grown up and had exposure to certain diseases that we as humans just never had to grapple with.
Yeah. Or for example, if you turn into a red panda, I've never seen a TF talking about changing your gut flora. So they are very susceptible to certain kinds of, I believe it's E. coli, but it might be something else. And they can die from it. And so you might TF and be like, wow, this is amazing. Oh, I don't feel so good. And then you have a really terrible case of the spins and then you die.
Oh, geez. Yeah, not fun.
Yeah, you might want to be careful. And so, there's my 10 steps, and I didn't even touch on certain things because, even things that we think we know really well, we still don't have a grasp on. I've got an example if you want to go into it, but it's kind of long.
Let's do it.
Okay, there's a group of drugs called the NSAIDs. It's like your ibuprofen, Tylenol, your carprofen, meloxicam, anything like that. And they work on 2 major gene families, I guess, which are called COX-1 and COX-2. One of the side effects, if you read your Tylenol, is stomach ulcers. And that's because if you take this drug, it affects COX-1, and I might be getting these off or mixed up. So we'll say COX-1 controls your inflammatory response, but COX-2 controls your gastric mucus secretion, which protects you from your own acid. And so taking this drug that is designed to get rid of inflammation and help your headache can cause your stomach to stop producing this protective mucus, and then your acid dissolves your own stomach wall. And we've known about this for a long time because it's one of the most highly studied drug categories. And so we're like, okay, we'll keep looking, and we find all these different kinds of drugs, and we finally find one that's, oh, this one is specifically only affects the inflammatory COX gene, and it doesn't touch the COX-2 gene, or the COX-2 gene receptor. So we theorize that if you take this, you'll avoid your gastric ulcer side effects, but still get the anti-inflammatory benefits. And that's not what happened. I think you still got the gastric acid effects, albeit to a much lesser degree, but you got a bunch of other side effects. And so it's not the miracle answer that everybody wanted. And that's one med for one gene that we have spent probably billions of dollars trying to research and figure out because it has such useful pharmaceutical uses. And like, that's just one tiny thing. As a society, science is still trying to convince people that climate change is real, that vaccines work, and that the earth isn't flat. Like, there's no way. Like, if we formed a utopia, then maybe we could start working on these steps. But, like, this doesn't even take into account the ethics of it. Yeah, there's just a lot of factors, and we're not even close.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big dose of reality, and it's a bit of an unfortunate one. But to kind of go back to something you said at the beginning, you mentioned that maybe we should be investing in finding the witches out there for magic. Isn't it also possible that at some point we might encounter intelligent life that might, already have this technology and be down to share? I mean, like, am I grasping at straws here? Because what is magic if not science we just don't understand yet?
That's fair. And I guess because I laid this out as a very scientific way, then theoretically you could have the science that can address each one of these problems and all the ones that we haven't even thought of. But I just feel like it's such a complex issue. I'll even give you the benefit of the doubt that this very advanced alien race has been staring at us and has samples of all of our genes and has been watching us and how things work, so that it's not like we know how to do it to our species, but you're totally different, so that they understand humans and whatever animals it is. But these are still very big issues, and evolution is going to screw with it constantly. Like, if you think about it, the bacteria in your gut are your distant cousins, and we all share something, and the only thing that's gone different is all this mutation through 3 billion years. So it might work a little bit, but ultimately bodies are going to find a way that it's just not going to go well. It's going to change. To quote one of the greatest movies of all time, life finds a way.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we've spent so much time researching, just as you said, these drugs that do specific things, and even then we still don't really know how they work and how to manipulate them in such a way to get them to do the small things that we want them to do. So when it comes to something like TF and you think about all the different steps involved, even just knowing, like you said, the easiest part of the genome and knowing where the genes are, there's all these other things that flow beyond that we just have such a bad grasp on. It's almost impossible to do.
Yeah. And if magic is just science we don't understand, that's fair. Like, if you showed what we have to somebody from the 1700s, they would absolutely think that it's magic. Maybe. But that doesn't mean that anything is possible. There are definite restrictions on what is physically and realistically possible in the universe. Like, for example, there's a reason that you can't see much farther beyond like an atom, and you have to measure all these different effects that the atom has and use those to correlate, because it's based on the wavelength of light and the time limit of the universe with the speed of light. And just because you want to, and maybe you find a way, or you theorize about a way to get past that, ultimately there's still this barrier in the way, and you're going to have to do a lot of work to find a roundabout way to exploit something else. I was actually just listening to a podcast on the 4-minute mile today, or the history of the 4-minute mile, and they thought the 5-minute mile was impossible. Somebody smashed that. They thought the 4-minute mile was possible. 1,500 people have smashed that record, and I think the current record is at 3 minutes 43 seconds. But to me, saying like, well, we just don't know enough, and in the future we'll know enough to make it happen, sounds like saying, well, what about a 2-minute mile? Like, eventually there is a physical limit to what you can do, and eventually some person's going to come along and set a record for the human mile, and that won't be broken because that's literally the best you can do. And we'll be shaving like fractions of a second off at a time, but eventually you're going to hit a limit.
Yeah, exactly. I get what you're saying. It's a little bit depressing to think about in the sense that, unless there is potentially some aliens out there, which, hi, hello, yes, please abduct me. But, unless we have friends out there who have managed to solve these situations for themselves and also have been studying us, it just seems like it's kind of an almost unattainable goal. Although I guess, one of, the add-ons to that question is less focused on like a full TF, but maybe from a partial TF perspective. Like, for example, tails. Do you think that it would ever at all be possible to have just a focused like tail addition happen? I know, like, there's been thoughts around, oh, maybe you could like grow one and try to like surgically attach it. And obviously, there'd be all the issues with, having the body not reject the tail, having the nerves actually like grow in and connect and work. And there's a whole rigmarole around that. But do you think that any more targeted changes might ever be in anyone's future?
I feel like I could see a way to do that. So just thinking about the tail, I'm thinking about how I would do it, and I could figure out the genes for a tail. I could use kind of stem cell therapy in my own cell line, which they're doing now for cancer treatments, to grow a tail that matches my genes so that my body won't reject it. I could surgically attach it. I don't know what I would do about the joints at the attachment site because those are really hard to deal with, but I mean, you might have arthritis in your tail, but you got a tail. As for the nerves, that's probably the hardest part. There's some promising research in getting nerves to regrow, which could happen, and potentially you could get a tail. So maybe you could do specific parts. It would still take a ton of work, but if you compartmentalize and make a much smaller thing, maybe it could be done. All the ones I can think of are using surgery in some way, which, like, sure, adding a part is okay. I don't think you want to surgically alter your entire body with all your bones and muscles and stuff, so I don't think that would work.
Yeah.
But I guess what you could do to solve the control of it issue is like the bionics with the like mind reading style prosthetics for hands and stuff. Those are getting pretty darn advanced. So maybe you won't physically feel your tail wag, but you've got your tail, you've got it attached to you, and through some sort of control with some electrode embedded in the base, you could make it wag.
I mean, you know what? I would take that. That's pretty close. I would be happy with that, to be completely honest. Like, if the door is at least still somewhat open for tail, then I'm a happy camper. Like, I just want tail.
Little bit of a tangent, but if I could invent any random, weird, sci-fi, futuristic thing that doesn't revolutionize the world, it would be like a smelling aid. So like a hearing aid, but for your smell. Because my sense of smell is really, really bad, and I feel like I'm missing out on everything. But if I could just like put this little thing clipped on my nose and smell and just be like, oh, you had lasagna 2 nights ago for dinner, that'd be amazing.
That would be amazing too. My sense of smell is also terrible in general, so I feel you there. I feel like I miss out on so many different things, and being able to have that kind of enhanced scent detecting ability would be pretty incredible, I gotta say.
Mm-hmm. There was another small tangent. There was a story. It was in this book where a doctor wrote about all these really strange patients he had. He had a guy who, I think he was 20 some years old. He ended up doing a lot of some sort of illicit hallucinogenic, but when he came out of it, he had the ability to smell basically what I said. He could smell what people had 3 days ago for dinner on them. He could tell what kinds of, like, I think he could smell like a smoker like half a mile away. He could tell what part of the cycle women were on for their menstrual cycle. And he's just like, the whole world opened up and he could see so much different information. And it sounds crazy.
I would love to have that ability to sense those kinds of things. It definitely, like you said, it just opens up this entire new dimension to the world and the way in which you experience it that I think is utterly fascinating.
Yeah. It sounds like it'd drive you crazy though sometimes, because could you imagine being in a city and there's just car exhaust everywhere? or like just the cacophony of smells.
Yeah, I feel like that is partially what a lot of animals sometimes go through. Like, if you're walking your dog and you're out and about, I can only imagine the different smells that are almost assailing their nostrils at all times.
Yeah, at veterinary clinics and the zoo and things, they tell you like just make sure you don't use any scented perfumes, colognes, deodorants, or shampoos because it can really bother some of the animals. So I can't imagine just walking down a crowded street.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So I guess last thing before we finish crushing dreams and move on to the next topic, what are your thoughts in general in terms of experiencing TFs through the digital realm? Because, there has always been, and this kind of touches, I guess, on that step 9 a little bit in your process, but there's always been talk about like, oh, if you could just download your brain into like the cloud, anything is possible in programming. So is there an avenue for people to potentially experience TF through the digital realm and make it feel like it's actually happening? Or do you think that all of that is also just completely beyond our skill as it stands right now in a species when it comes to science?
Sure. I actually found this really interesting. I had never thought about this that much just because I like biology and computers scare me. But to download somebody's brain, I don't know if that's possible, but if you've played the game Soma, I think you could do something like that where you create this copy and there will be a version of you that'll sit outside and say it didn't work, but there might be a fairly accurate simulation of you, which if we somehow perfected it would be, that's a big branch of ethics, but could theoretically do it, which would be really interesting. I've never tried VR, but I've seen what some people are doing with it, and I've read some of the like kind of papers or studies that have come out of VR and using it on its relationship to your perception of yourself, which sound really interesting, and I really want to give it a try at some point. But I think it's definitely an improvement on what we've got now. And I think if I had to throw my money into some sort of TFing in real life, what we're really after is the experience and the perceptions of it. We don't really care about the actual sensations of it. We don't actually have to physically feel it or have it occur to us in the physical world. It just has to happen in a way that we perceive it. So there are like some crazy delusional and hallucinatory mental differences, or sometimes they're mental disorders, not always, out there. And like we've all had crazy, realistic, vivid dreams, and many of us have had TF dreams. And at least in my case, they don't feel like much, but they give the impression of it being real. And I think if you could, like a lot of people I see talk about lucid dreaming or something like that, that would be a great way to do it. There's this cool thing, can't remember what it's called, but there's this cool, it's basically a magnetic helmet, kind of like one of those EEG caps that people wear to measure their brainwaves. There's this cool helmet people have invented that can kind of do a laser magnetic field. So it's a very focused magnetic field. And when they test this on people, they stimulate different parts of the brain. And it's just like, okay, we're turning it on. And then you suddenly feel this thing. And then they turn it off and it's totally gone. So like, I guess theoretically, if you just found the parts, like brains are interesting. Like if you're going to trip on a hallucinogen, you don't necessarily need to program it. I'm saying this like I've done drugs. I've never done drugs.
Yeah.
I've barely done ibuprofen. But I guess what I'm saying is if you kind of put in a specific kind of frame of mind and then use this thing to stimulate it, then potentially you could do it. Okay, better example. Sleep paralysis. Everybody who has sleep paralysis, or most people, they can't move, and they experience the sensation of somebody watching them from across the room who often is demonic, walks over and is even more scary and demonic and maybe sits on them.
Yes.
People are having this shared experience from a fairly similar stimuli, but without any kind of prior knowledge of it happening. So something in there is kind of wired to be like what your brain's probably doing is saying, I can't move, that's scary. And as you start to be afraid, your brain is just like, okay, well, what am I afraid of? It's probably somebody scary coming closer to me. So if you could potentially use this cool magnetic helmet thing to just trigger this sensation of I'm changing, and then just let it do its thing, and potentially with more control over it, you could guide it a little bit more, or stimulating the kind of emotions you might want, or the like if you wanted to change your personality, you might even be able to do that.
So basically, what I'm getting is if we want to experience TF, we need to invest our energy in lucid dreaming and maybe drugs.
Yeah, I do the first, don't do the second. It's not worth it. I'm a doctor.
Okay.
Don't do it.
Yep. No, that is fair. I will take your medical advice. It is very well received. Oh man. Amazing. So, I guess then building off of all of the realism that we've had and some of the dreams that we've crushed, I've noticed in a lot of your artwork, you've done a lot of transformation as it relates to fictional stuff. So like Pokemon, you've mentioned Zelda, My Little Pony, other kind of fictional properties. What has kind of drawn you towards interacting with transformation as it relates to fictional properties? Is it the fact that it's not really grounded in real world biology or mechanics that makes it kind of uniquely appealing to you?
Yeah, I would say that's part of it. It's funny you mention MLP because I've literally, I think, only done 2 drawings, and one of them was a trade for somebody, and the other was just as a joke.
Oh. I don't know. I mean, I was looking through your gallery and I saw those were 2 that came up, and I was like, okay, well, 1 is a one-off, 2 is a pattern, maybe. So,
Yeah, I was just TF Central likes to draw themselves
they
as
do.
a red polo wearing person, and I also like to draw myself as a red polo wearing person sometimes, so I just thought it would be funny. But part of the thing I like about some of the fictional characters is it's fun to think about how they actually are, because Pokemon they don't look realistic. If you've ever seen me draw Pokemon, I do not give my boy Jolteon 3 toes. He gets 4 toes like any other canid in the world. It's fun to think about how things would work in them, because like basically what Pokemon are super-powered animals. And it's like, well, it's like becoming a dog, but you have a lot more to go on. There's kind of history to it. People who know about Pokemon, there's like all these fun tropes and kinds of things that you can get into. So it's just kind of like, it's like a dog, but more. And I like electricity. I like going fast. I like being almost a porcupine. Like, why not combine all those things into this awesome TF? I had a chemistry professor once who said when he was a kid, he loved science fiction, but then the more he got into science, the more he realized how things actually work, and the less science fiction held up to him because he would see all these flaws in their reasoning. And like when you watch Star Trek and they say something about how this engine works or whatever, you're like, that's not actually how that engine works. Wait, you need that part. You can't fly this without that, or something like that. But he found that fantasy was so much more interesting now, because you didn't have these rules that he was very well aware of and that you constantly see broken. It's just like, oh, we're in this world, here are the rules, and let's go. And he said like he loves Lord of the Rings. The only part he hated about Lord of the Rings was when Frodo and Aragorn are on that rock being chased by the Balrog on the staircase, and they rock back and forth, and he's like, they don't have enough weight to move that thing around. And that's the only flaw he can find in Lord of the Rings, except for Legolas mounting that horse. But whatever.
Of course. So basically, when it comes to these kind of fictional areas, like you were kind of saying, it's almost comforting to know that the rules are not at all bound in our kind of real world philosophy of physics, of biology, or anything like that. And you just have a different set of rules and you just kind of can run with that and explore that experience in a different way.
Yes, I think I would change it a little bit. I think I would say that I still operate on the same rules, and it's more fun to try to figure out how this animal shoots fire based on the still real world rules, at least to some degree. Or like if you read Jolteon's Pokedex entries, it says he generates electricity in his lungs, which is ridiculous. Because like how electric eels do it is really interesting. They have all these specialized muscles that do it. So to think about, well, the Pokedex has been wrong before. It's always wrong. It loves to over exaggerate. But to try to think about, okay, well, I'm going to have this cool scientific thought experiment on how do I get an animal to generate electricity wrapped up in a fluffy but pointy yellow dog.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. And to go back almost to what you were saying about that professor, when I think of science fiction in general, I definitely agree that being a mechanical engineer by trade, when you hear the jargon around how an engine works and you have the real world backing on it, sometimes it can make it hit a little different. Whereas when you have that kind of fantastical approach in these fantasy settings, you don't have to think about that as much. And you can instead enhance the in universe explanations with your own knowledge and make it that much more realistic and appealing to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then I guess in general, would you say Jolteon is still the best boy?
Yeah, of course he is. But there are also many other best boys. Yeah, but mainly Jolteon.
And, something else that I know we've chatted about before on this show and just in general is about being open about transformation with other folks. And I know that a lot of people are very nervous about opening up about those topics, be it in specific TF spaces at cons and such, or even just in general. And I know that your experience has been a little bit different in terms of being open about your interests with your friends and family. So I was curious to hear a little bit more as to how that's gone for you and how the reactions or responses that you've gotten have then informed how you've navigated this topic in general.
Sure. So if you haven't seen much of my Twitter account or some of my drawings, I like to include a lot of friends and sometimes my family in them. And I'm pretty open with, so I have a twin brother who isn't into TF, is aware and has a Fur Affinity account, but isn't active at all or doesn't really get into it. But I like to TF him sometimes. And I think it's really fun to TF somebody who isn't as into it. Because he's a good sport. I never do anything bad with it. It's just kind of for fun. But like, it just adds a different kind of reaction to it and a different appreciation for it. Because like, sometimes when I TF him, it's like, oh man, this is so cool. Like, I've never thought about this kind of thing before. Or like, oh man, look at this cool weird elephant hoof hand thing. Like, and then he'll just be like, I'm gonna go smash things or whatever. And I think it's really fun. And I'm open with my mom about it, and I share my drawings sometimes with her. Not all of them, obviously, but I did a Mother's Day gift for her recently where I showed her a drawing of myself and one of my best friends hugging. And she's like, great, where's mine? And so she said, I think I would want to be a lynx. So I drew my brother and I hugging her. Well, we're all animals, and she's a lynx, and it's fun. It's great. And in vet school, I met one of my best friends. We shared the interest of TF, and I have other friends from vet school who we also share TF in common with. So it's kind of cool because we're all in a very grueling time, a very difficult time where we spend hours and hours studying everything to just be like, oh, you like turning into animals in this totally weird way? So do I. So I found it very rewarding. I'll even mention or talk about it with coworkers sometimes, but obviously I'm very selective about that. But I think it's really nice to have this thing that I enjoy and other people in my life find interesting, if not a little peculiar. But yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear. And I guess I'm particularly curious around when you opened up to some of those friends of yours in school. I mean, I guess in some ways it almost makes sense that folks in that position would be more inclined to finding that interesting, given that you're studying anatomy and how to take care of animals on a daily basis. How did you broach those topics? Did they come up organically, or did you make a thoughtful, conscious effort to try and bring them up in conversation with specific people who you thought might be receptive to it?
So I think what I did is I generally just bide my time, and eventually the topic of werewolves comes up somewhere, usually around Halloween. And so you say, oh, I like werewolves a lot, but I find them a little overdone.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can branch off into other were creatures, and then you can, if they're still nibbling at the hook, you can then switch off into other things. Like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if like instead of a were creature, it's like this person who can choose when to turn into the pangolin or something, and then you can get off on the topic there, and then kind of you just keep pushing it, and eventually if they're like very receptive, then you're just like, I draw this. Look at my book.
That's amazing. And you've generally had very positive reactions?
Yeah. So outside of my like friends and family, like with my coworkers, it's usually like, huh, okay, that's interesting, and they're interested to see, and they're curious to see like what I like. They'll ask like, oh, have you drawn anything interesting recently? And like I'll share if I feel comfortable sharing a particular drawing. And like a lot of the times, I don't know, I feel like people expect to be hated, but it really like if you can step back to a person who just is never exposed to this stuff, it's really interesting. And like I don't know, I hate being asked, oh, how was your weekend? What's the weather like or something? Or if they know about this, it's like, whoa, what do you think about turning into a manatee? It's like, that'd be great. Very relaxing, warm water, just keep away from boats.
Yeah. So basically, it not only is it have you had good experiences, it's also a nice thing that then you can return to as a topic of conversation with people.
Yeah. And like we all know, there's a huge world of possible questions, and honestly, I feel like the people who aren't in it can come up with some really cool ideas because I don't know, once you've been in it for 10 years, you keep seeing the same kinds of tropes and the same ideas in general. And so when you have somebody who has no idea about it and they're like, oh, what about this thing? It's like, I have literally never heard or thought or seen that anywhere. And it can be really interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely think that, when you talk to people who don't actually have a basis in transformation, they can really bring out ideas that you just do not see anywhere else. And then they can almost like plant that seed in you that maybe you can develop and then spread to other people in the fandom.
Yeah. I don't like the talk of like, oh, what are normies gonna think or anything? It's like, and trying to convert them. Let the normies stay normies and forcibly include them, but don't convert them. Like that's where you get great reactions. That's where you get really cool, unique ideas that you might not have seen. And like obviously, if you think your parents or your friends are gonna hate it, don't show them. But like random strangers or coworkers who you aren't gonna interact with very much or whatever, what's the harm? They might think you're weird, but whatever. Like, I mean, we all went through high school.
Yeah.
Literally everybody feels weird in high school.
Yeah, I have yet to meet a single person who didn't feel weird in at least some way in like high school or growing up. And if you didn't feel weird and are now also into TF, I would love to chat with you because like what? How?
Like, I don't know. Life's
Oh,
too short.
yeah, I
Enjoy your
agree.
things. If people don't like it, whatever. That's on them. It's no reflection on you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will just say, like, speaking from my own personal experience, I am a very big tail enthusiast, and I do consider myself a furry in addition to being into TF, and I have a collection of tails that I will just wear around wherever, in public and otherwise. If I'm going to the grocery store, I might wear one, and it doesn't really matter if people don't really like that because, again, life is too short. Like, go in and live your life, do the things you want to do, like.
Wholesome messages.
Yes. So we do have some audience questions that I did want to get to from some of our usual suspects. And of course, as always, we encourage people to submit questions because I always find they're very interesting to go through. So the first one I have here is from Figer Fire. And Figer Fire says, limitations in TF are common tropes in many media forms, from werewolves by moonlight, vampires to bats, or modern takes with animorphs or other curses within the context of magic or other sorts of media. So, is there a particular transformation limitation that you've seen within media that really stuck with you? Or alternatively, what is a limitation to TF that you find interesting or fun to engage with? So I'm going to throw this to you first, Cameron.
Okay. I'm not the biggest consumer of media. I keep my head down generally, and I'm just totally unaware of a lot. I'm very oblivious. But one thing I can remember from a TV show, I guess Teen Wolf way back in the day, or it feels like way back in the day, I remember seeing a commercial. I never watched the show where it's like anytime your heart gets above a certain rate, you start to transform.
Oh yeah.
And I remember just immediately being like, look, I love werewolves, but that's dumb as heck. Like, are you kidding me? You go up the stairs and you TF. You take it. You have a dream at night. Like you have a circadian rhythm where your heart rate goes up in your sleep at some point. Like literally like if you're a little dehydrated and you go from lying down to sitting up, you're gonna transform. That's just dumb. That's dumb.
Definitely sounds like the people who made that did not fully understand how physiology works.
Yeah, and just like, are you kidding? Like, if you're nervous, if like there are people who like you have a nerve that controls your heart rate, but it also innervates your GI tract. So like, if you have a particularly big meal, your heart rate might go up, or if you have gas, or if you're taking a dump, you might TF. Like, talk about a limit. Like, it's worse than Bruce Banner.
Yeah, you just be TFing all the time.
Which, like, honestly, whatever, but
Yeah, I
for the
mean, it's not.
plot of a show, not very good.
Yeah, it would be funny. You know what? I almost feel like it would be funny to see a TF media that actually did it in exactly the way you've described, where it's just like, bam, like almost every 5 minutes, you're doing something mundane and you TF.
That would be hilarious because I could imagine the show opens, pilot episode, cars are passing by outside, sun starts rising, goes to this guy, his alarm clock goes off, he goes, ah, and starts to grow fur right there. And it's like, well, I guess this day started just like any other.
Yeah, it would definitely be like some sort of a sitcom, I think.
Yeah, and there's already like holes in the wall and claw marks everywhere, and he's like just trying to make it to the bathroom during this horrifying process. It's like I gotta brush my teeth.
It's like, not again, cue laugh track.
That would be so funny.
That'd be amazing. I would watch the shit out of that,
I would watch that
honestly.
show.
Yeah. I don't have a limitation that can top that, honestly. Like the big one that has always stuck with me was the Animorphs one, which was kind of in the text of the question. I think that having like a weird 2 hour arbitrary limit was always really interesting, especially because they immediately addressed what happens if you go over that in the series. And, I very much like and appreciate the fact that those were bounds that they explored fully and showed what the consequences were. But I mean, beyond that, I can't really think of any other major limitations that I can think of that stood out for me other than, I don't know, maybe like the Ben 10 watch. I don't know. The Animorphs is the one that always stood out the
What,
most
we're
for
having
me.
to touch the animal?
Yes, touching the animal was always really cool, that you had to actually acquire the DNA so that you could TF into it and not just, oh, I think I want to become an elephant, so I can become an elephant, because it made the whole process of going about the transformation that much more difficult.
They are so lucky that Cassie's mom and dad are zoo vets and also wildlife vets. And I'm just going to rant a little bit. There's no way in hell you could do both those things. As somebody who has worked both at a zoo and spends 14-hour days at the zoo and just got off an 11-hour shift at the wildlife center, there's no way you could wake up, treat the animals there, get to work, treat those animals, get back, treat those animals, and like their housing situation for the animals, that's not right. That's very unethical how they do it, and there's just issues with that all the way. But it's like they're lucky. I get why they did it.
Yeah.
And like even just having Tobias hang out in the rafters while there's rabbits looking up and seeing him would freak them so much.
So basically, what you're saying is K.A. Applegate had the wrong idea around the ethics of the keeping of those animals and the realism of having that job, but was bang on in terms of the setup for the kids.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're gonna get nasty fine.
Yeah, definitely. Perfect. And so the other question I have here is from our illustrious Ulysses Duckler. And Ulysses asks, what is your favorite TF trigger that uses very heavy sci-fi or hard science slash tech elements? And I think this is actually a very appropriate question, given we have just spent a good chunk of time destroying everyone's hopes and dreams about TF through science.
Yeah, for the same reasons, like scientific triggers are just kind of hard for me to get past sometimes, and they have to be pretty robust for me to really enjoy it. I do remember one that I still remember where somebody was just like, it was a story and they started off knowing or saying like they were very confident and they're talking to somebody and they're like, yeah, so basically I scientifically rationalized how if the universe is such and such a way, then thought can control the universe. And by having this thought, it unlocked his ability to just manipulate the universe and therefore TF people. And I thought, huh, that's an interesting, very ballsy way to go about having a sciencey trigger where you just reason yourself into godhood.
That's amazing. Holy crap.
Yeah,
I've never heard that before. That wow.
yeah. I can't remember their. It was like a 3-step argument, and then they're just like, "Wah."
So basically, we just need to have the right thoughts, and then we can just solve all the science problems.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was like, whoa. Other than that, I think I like, I don't know. I've been seeing some recent like digitizing ones,
Yeah,
and that seems kind of cool.
yeah, those are very cool. I do really like those.
And I like vet clinic TFs, and I'm disappointed because sometimes the vet clinics aren't at all what vet clinics are like. And so I'm saying to everybody right now, if you like the idea of TF, like having a power play where you TF your vet into an animal, please contact me. I would be happy to be turned into an animal, and I will help make sure that this is the most realistic vet clinic or zoo or wildlife center that you've ever seen.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay, well, then people do know who to call if they want to be undergoing a change at a zoo.
Yeah, yeah, I'm working on setting up a grant so that all the TF people, once I like get this facility built, I'll let you guys all know. But I'm trying to work on setting up this thing so that all the people who have already TF'd can come and have a home in a zoo.
I will say that when it comes to sci-fi and science triggered TFs, at least in my vein, like I've always been really into the ones that involve aliens. Often they are triggered by some sort of alien technology, and I like those because we don't know how that would work. So who can say that our understanding of them is right or wrong? So those have always really interested me whenever they crop up in media. Sometimes they can be really wholesome, sometimes they can be really horrifying. I know that I really enjoy the Alien franchise, with the xenomorphs and everything, and those always have a healthy dose of TF in them. Although almost always the person dies at the end, which
I
is not
hate
really,
those.
yeah, I'm not really a big fan of that. But at least from like a kind of horrifying perspective, I can really get behind body horror. But obviously myself, I mean, I just want to turn into a Lombax. So like I'm just waiting for
The
Insomniac to do
sheepinator.
that. Yeah, like I'm just waiting for Insomniac to have a game where a human TFs into a Lombax, and then I will just play the shit out of that game forever, and that'll be the end of that. So.
I really don't like the xenomorphs. I find them very creepy
Mhm.
and constantly they're like a really bad RPer or like that friend you had in childhood who they constantly come up with a solution to literally every problem you can throw at them where it's just like I used a special bullet and it finally hurt you. Yeah, but my blood's acidic so everything starts to melt around me. And so that's the way they feel.
They are. I mean, they 100% are like that. Like basically whatever the story has thrown at them for the service of upping the stakes, they will almost always find a way to be immune to it. So I will,
Lazy.
yeah, it is lazy writing to some degree, but also I like it. So I'm not gonna sit here and defend it as like some paragon of science fiction. I just think it's neat.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, that's the end of the audience questions that I had. Did you have any questions for me?
Actually, yeah. I actually ask this sometimes at work when we get new people in. We'll ask a question just as an icebreaker. If you were a were creature, like a werewolf or whatever, based on the worst animal related injury you've ever gotten, what would you be? Like a werewolf becomes a werewolf because they got bit by a wolf and that's a bad injury and it passes a curse or whatever. But if it was every animal is cursed, you just had to be injured the most by it.
Okay, so this has to be based on like the worst injury I've had?
Yeah,
Okay.
from an
Huh.
animal.
Oh, this is an interesting question. Worst injury from an animal. So I haven't been bitten by any animals. I have definitely gotten scratched. I'm trying to think if there's been any other like more intense. Okay, actually, I have a funny story. I don't know if this counts, but I think it would be funny as a TF trigger. So, one time there was a band of raccoons that lived basically in my neighbor's backyard. And I love raccoons. Like, I have like raccoon stuff all over my place. Like, I'm a big fan of Rocket from Guardians of the Galaxies. Raccoons are great. Anyways, so this band of raccoons, I was like 12 or 13 at the time, and they had made their like den, in the neighbor's next door yard, and I had to take out the trash that evening, and they basically figured out that I was taking out the trash and started advancing on me almost because I was, basically delivering dinner in a sense. I mean, the bins that we have in my city are supposed to be raccoon proof, but God knows they don't work. But anyways, so I actually got a little bit spooked. And so I was trying to throw out the trash and they started chasing me. And they didn't actually chase me very far, but like I totally fell and like twisted my ankle. And I like to think that would be a very funny trigger into a raccoon TF. It's like you were chased by raccoons, they caused you to twist your ankle, and that's what caused your TF. So I'm gonna go with that because I think that that's the most amusing one. If it had to be an actual like injury that was dealt though, like the worst I've really gotten is like getting like particularly scratched by my cats. So
I think the raccoon one sounds fun.
yeah, I
It's like the anchovies in SpongeBob.
yeah, basically. Like it's a very similar energy and I just think that if all it took to TF you into like a were creature was like getting chased by them and they don't actually even do something, you just like injure yourself because of like your own discombobulation, I just think that would be again an amazing kind of trope to explore in fiction because that would just be absolutely hilarious. I would totally love to chase people as a were raccoon, make them fall over and then they change too. Well, perfect.
I want to
Well,
hear what other people have to say too. Comment.
yes, I would
I
I
want to
would
hear
love
your
to hear that
answers.
too. Yeah, I would love to hear people's answers as well. Well, then I guess I'll ask you, what is the worst way you've been injured and what would that animal be?
Fortunately, it was a Great Pyrenees dog, which is kind of what brought up that sequence that I did earlier, which is great because like you're just a giant, fluffy, drooly dog. Like what's so terrifying? Yeah, no, I just got bit in the hand. It was a stressed dog, and that thing happens. But like, fortunately, that's it because like I've had to sit on cougars before to try to keep them down as we're trying to get more anesthetic for them.
Yeah,
So
oh my
it could be
gosh.
way worse.
It really could be way worse. I'm glad it was just from a dog.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really had a great time chatting with you. I know we've wanted to have this conversation for a while. And again, if people are looking for your stuff, where can they find you?
Yeah, so Twitter is definitely the best place to find me. It's at a underscore curious underscore fox because I don't know what I'm doing. And then I didn't know how Twitter worked. There's a very common theme that I don't understand technology. I didn't know how Twitter worked, and so I saw that Isle Beaver changing his all the time, and so I'm like, that's really cool. I can do something kind of like that, I guess. And so I started to do it, and I was changing the wrong thing, and so none of the like messages people would send to me, or any of the like shout outs or like the acts or the replies and stuff would reach me because I was changing the username and not the handle or whatever, whichever one's the right one. And I just remember seeing comments of like, I don't think he knows what he's doing. Like, you're very correct.
Well, you've got the solid handle down now, at least.
Yeah. So come on by for very sporadic artwork and almost nothing else.
Well, we will have that as well as your FA handle in the title card and whatnot, and of course in the link, so people will be
Yeah,
able to
and it's
find
on my
it.
Twitter, I think.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for coming on, Cameron. Really enjoyed having you here. I hope we crushed some dreams but gave some hope to people in the end. And yeah, I hope that everyone had a good time listening today, and I hope that everyone stays TFy and tunes in next week. Thanks so much, everyone.